This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
About the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
Her mother is one of the world's most well-known African-American writers. But Rebecca Walker has carved a career of her own as one of the most significant thinkers of the early 21st century. Rebecca Walker joins us this afternoon from her home in Hawaii on Left of Black. And we're also joined by the artist Pierre Bennu and his partner Jamyla Bennu as they talk about working in the small context of film and going viral and the power of social media. This is Left of Black, and I am Mark Anthony Neal. Welcome to Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and we are joined by the pair of Pierre and Jamyla Bennu, coming to us outside of Manhattan, but in Brooklyn. How are you doing this afternoon?
We are excellent.
Wonderful.
Thank you for joining us on Left of Black. You know, I've been such a big fan of your work. It was about 3 years ago, in fact, almost exactly, that Greg Tate and Arthur Jaffa were down here at Duke having a public conversation about soul. And Greg just pulls up the video treatment that you did for Imani Uzuri's Sun Moon Child. And I was just floored, right? I had never seen anything like that before in my life. I mean, just the way it commented on the continuity of movement and rhythm and sound and all of these things. And you know, it just struck me as something on the one hand that was just so unique to our moment. So unique to the technology that we now have access to in terms of social media. And, you know, it's been like my gospel. You know, every place I go, oh, I got to show you this video. I mean, literally, I was up in Cambridge at Harvard yesterday at the Hip Hop Archives and showed the video for the students there. And Hank Willis Thomas was in the audience, and he was like, you know, it was just this wonderful thing. And so let me start by asking you about, you know, you've done kind of traditional full-length film. But really, the last couple of years, you've been doing these very interesting kind of film shorts that you make available on the website Exit the Apple. You know, tell me what your process is like. You know, what's your inspiration these days?
Well, you know, I'm thinking about talking to folks in the language they understand, and also, you know, I feel like Hollywood right now. The way that the corporate structure is set up, it's kind of this very disgusting, gross, slow-moving machine. Yeah. And the way you fight a giant is by getting micro. You don't get another giant that's half the size. You get something that's really tiny. So instead of focusing my attention on trying to put together another feature length right now, though I have scripts for days, I've been thinking about just making something so tiny and so viral that it kind of works inside the, you know what I mean? Like inside the giant almost. And it's kind of like a mosquito, you know what I mean? Like you're driving a car, you're a big, great, you know, you're a person, you're full, you know, and then a mosquito comes in and you're swatting and you could probably crash your car. And so I'm kind of thinking from the kind of viral mosquito mentality. I'm trying to come from that perspective.
I remember when Spike Lee did Get on the Bus back in '96, right? And there was a lot of chatter, at least for folks that were in the film, about the fact that he shot it on digital. You know, to cut the cost, and you know, this would have been, you know, the very early kind of incarnations of digital cameras, and now everybody can shoot anything, right? You know, because of digital technology. I mean, talk a little bit about, you know, having access now to the technology, but also, you know, what social media has created. When you think about sites like YouTube, when you think about, you know, Twitter and Facebook, I mean, how has that, you know, helped you do the kind of work that you and Jamyla have been doing?
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I think it's interesting because as ubiquitous as the technology is and as accessible as it is to everyone, like you said, everyone can shoot anything that they want. I think it's interesting for a person like Pierre who kind of straddles those worlds, who like does have, you know, film training and like a storyteller's eye and things like that, to come into the world in which there's like so much, you know what I mean? So much content being produced, so many voices being heard, and it's like an interesting kind of comment on that ubiquity, but also like a interesting voice to add to the mix. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because he's kind of, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely levels the playing field, and that's good. But it's also awful. You know what I mean? Everyone has something to say, so it's pure democracy, but at the same time, it's pure democracy. So,
you know, and things like expertise, you know, get lost out, and folks, you know, folks' skill set doesn't get recognized the way that it should. Yeah, but like for me, the important thing, you know, because I kind of had my own snobby art school bias at first. You know, it's just like, you know, I'm going to put together my collection. I'll put it in a gallery and 12 people will see it and they'll eat wine and, you know what I mean? It's like, or you could take that skill set, put it in a forum where everyone can see it. And granted, it's next to the girl falling down the steps and, you know, chocolate rain, but you're seeing it and you're giving what I'm personally feel is fine art to people who otherwise wouldn't be there, who otherwise wouldn't have access to, or probably would not go to a gallery and sit down for 2 hours and discuss the, you know, whatever. So that's kind of also where I'm coming out with just putting it out on the internet, which is, it was, believe me, it was so hard in the beginning. I was really like, but it's a beautiful thing, actually. Absolutely. You're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with the artists Pierre Bennu and Jamyla Bennu. I want to talk about YouTube for a second. And, you know, I've told you this story before. You know, we taught down here, myself and the hip-hop producer Ninth Wonder, you know, taught this incredible class last spring, Sampling Soul. And it was as much about the sampling process in hip-hop as it was intellectual property issues. And I remember showing your video for Sun Moon Child in the class, and literally 2 days or 3 days later, the video was no longer available. And the very issues that we had talked about in class about intellectual property law and this idea of borrowing and I mean, all these kinds of things. And so I took the example of your struggles with YouTube, you know, to keep your work out and available, you know, as a midterm exam for the class.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about, you know, what was at play there? I mean, I'm one of the folks that I would argue that what you've done in your work across the board, I mean, that's fair use, right?
Yeah.
You're taking something that exists and really translating and transforming it into something that it wasn't, you know, by bringing these disparate bits and pieces of digital data together. But what was at play with the YouTube situation?
Basically, it was my choice to just ultimately be stubborn about it being a piece of art as opposed to it being theft. I put it back up after several months of like talking to my lawyer friends and what should I do, and you know, Romare Bearden didn't have to like go up to Life magazine and say I need a clip page 12, or you know, like that's a
great point, right? Yeah.
And so I just stubbornly put it back up, and YouTube actually has been asking me if they want to sponsor it or whatever. Like I stayed clear of it because I don't want money from it. The point is not right now anyway for me to you know, attain money from it. It's about the work being out there. It's kind of my connection to growing up in New York. I know this is a side, you know, but a tangent. But I remember the graffiti artist. That was like my first inspiration. And this for me is like getting up. You know what I mean? Getting up on the trains.
I hear you.
That's the connection it is for me anyway with hip hop, if you want to, you know, bring it back to that.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about Michael Jackson, because Michael Jackson is all over that video, right? In so many different ways and shapes and forms. Yeah.
Well, Michael Jackson, I think, symbolizes, he was the prodigal son of Motown.
Right, and it's you know, also important to mention that this is the video that you do before he dies, right? So yes. Right.
Yes, and I've always kind of been fascinated with Michael Jackson as an icon and culturally what he represents. Like, there was a moment in time where we had black artists, you know, the soul section in the record store, and then we had pop artists, completely different thing. He represents the turn of the two. He also represents, like in Motown, he was the prodigal child who had access to Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder,
Diana Ross,
He had access to geniuses, and he himself was a genius. So for him to come of age and not be caught up in the child star thing, I mean, just so many things came together. And, you know, talk about the growth of video. Him and video grew. And can I just say this about Michael Jackson also, as just a hero of mine in another way? When there was no film industry, Michael Jackson for us was he was our. No one was going to give us a role. I'm gonna say give us, but there was no one selling films at the time that were going to have us playing the lead in something like Thriller. Wasn't going to happen. Right. But Michael Jackson did it in a way that was way ahead of his time. It was so viral. He was like, yo, I'm going to use video, something that no one cares about, really. Right. I'm going to put a linear story to it, and I'm going to make myself the star and my music the soundtrack.
Right. And so Wesley Snipes shows up in the Bad video, right? Right. You know, because where else was he going to work in 1987, right?
But that's what is directed by Scorsese. Am I correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Bad was, and I'm like, Scorsese wasn't really checking for Wesley Snipes then. You know what I'm saying? Like, who was? Or for music videos, and it just. Anyway, so
there's also a sense in which Michael Jackson has like kind of sacrificed himself on the altar of celebrity, and now that he has passed away, it's possible to see the arc of his life in you know what I mean, in its completion, and his relationship to celebrity is unlike anyone else's ever in human history.
In human history, sure.
And it's an interesting, you know, connection to like the current project, the Black Moses Barbie project, and its comment on like celebrity and history and historical figures and
perceptions of power and
and the like the ways in which we are allowed to become well known, you know what I mean, in the larger culture and stuff. So it's, I'm sorry.
No, that's great. That's fine.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with Pierre Bennu and Jamyla Bennu. And since you just mentioned it, Black Moses Barbie, I you know, like everybody else, I think I first saw the video on Facebook. Maybe Dream Hampton had posted a copy of it, and of course we go to the website, and I remember watching it the first time, and it was this combination of my mouth being wide open in shock, and then this laughter that I just couldn't control, and it was brilliant on so many different levels, right? You know, our relationship to toys, our relationship to branding, our understanding of what Black history is, right? And the ways that Black history gets presented to us, you know, basically in these commodifiable branded ways, you know, and so it made so much sense. And I remember showing it to my undergraduate class. Because, you know, like Sun Moon Child, every chance I get, right? Oh, you need to see this video. And they were just stunned, right? I mean, they didn't have any words to describe what they had just saw. And then I do a little backstory, you know, Pierre Bennu, and, you know, show them Sun Moon Child, and they still couldn't quite find the language. So talk about this project, and you know, you just posted the second, you know, video from the Black Barbie series. You talk a little bit about, you know, what your inspiration was here.
Well, okay, well, this is quite a bit. Well, the project itself kind of deals with just deconstructing, you know, images, racist and racial images of us, and just empowering them. It started. There are two things that sparked it originally. One was the image of Land O'Lakes butter. Every time I go into a supermarket and I see that, I still just cringe.
Right, the quote unquote Indian squaw.
Woman, you know, you talk about sexism as well. You know, it's woman on her knees holding out. You know, it's just a horrible image. And I was just like, well, you know, I think it was the Redskins who wouldn't give up the logo a while back. And I was just like, you know what? If that was a symbol of a revolutionary Native American, would they still be so willing to hold on to that image? So I was just like, wow, empowering the image might change the perception of the image. And so I started playing with that, and I came up with a story called The Reason Aunt Jemima Smiles. And the story, basically, long story short, is about Aunt Jemima as starting a rebellion on a plantation. You know what I mean? So taking that character and
with a spatula in her hand.
Yeah, exactly.
In the painting, it's a rolling pin.
A rolling pin.
And just playing with those dynamics. So that's just started to snowball, and you know, then we have Black Moses Barbie, and you want to say anything about Black Moses Barbie?
I think again, like what it says about women, about children, about our relationship to toys, like you said, and kind of the kind of heroines that girls are encouraged to have, as opposed to those that boys are encouraged to have. You know, there's something interesting about that. And then also, like, it's our American historical mythology. We love the gangster, the cowboy, the pirate, you know, the bootlegger, like all these kind of rogue figures. But when it's a person of color in that rogue figure, it's silenced, and it's not given that same mythological status. And
and you know, the gun, like, you know, I was also thinking about the symbol of the gun as power, and how oftentimes it's not. Whenever there's a black male or any person of color really who how can I say this, is fighting, I guess, the system, they always have to have an establishment, a badge. A badge. Or
you know, some kind of marker of why it's okay that they have.
Wesley Snipes in Passenger 57, right.
Exactly. Like I was just telling a friend of mine the other day, we were talking about Glory and Washington winning. I was like, Denzel was fighting the, you know what I'm saying? This is the Civil War. And at the end of the movie, he ends up in a ditch. Like, we didn't need to see that. He could have just been it could have been a marker. It could have been a plaque that said, okay, this guy, you know, he passed on fighting for the, you know, but that's what he got the award for. Then the next time he got an Oscar, he played a road cop. He ended up, before he said he was King Kong, and then they killed him. You know what I'm saying? So again, you know, these smart, brave, courageous people are not kind of allowed to
shine they're not given their mythological shoes. You know? So the large shoes to stomp on American culture don't go to us, even when our real life stories warrant that.
Exactly. And we'll talk a little bit, you know, for the remaining time that we have, about your working partnership. You know, and almost everything I read that you write here, I mean, you're always mentioning your work with Jamyla and how she's kind of the other half of the work that you do. So talk about what that division of labor looks like on the one hand, but you know, but how the real working partnership works. You know, particularly, you know, as a couple that's also, you know, partnered in a romantic sense.
Well, it all goes together, man. Like, we have a new kid, and I mean, that's been,
congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to the club.
Man, it's no joke. Hats off to parents. But creating work in that space, you have to have a partner or somebody who understands the give and go, the yin and yang, and we kind of just work with, you know, within the moments that we can.
There's always been a sense of, like, I think yin and yang is a good one, because, like, the symbol it flows back and forth, and we've always had, you know, been married for 12 years or something like that. And so, like, there's been flows in which, like, you know, when we were working on the feature-length movie, there was a lot of, you know, I was with the clipboard working on the feature, and then we were working on our business together, in which I'm, you know, more to the forefront in that, and Pierre was at the packing table filling orders. You know what I mean? Like, so like there's a lot of straight up taking turns of, you know what I mean? Like, let's do this for a minute, and you help me, and let's do that for a minute, and I help you. You know?
Yeah, so it's a dance, and being lovers and married helps that dance just really be choreographed a whole lot better in the long run. I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. That was fantastic. I mean, I think you're role models for lots of folks who are thinking about, you know, how to do this in ways that are productive and healthy, and particularly when we talk about black men and black women, non-competitive, right? You know, all in the spirit of producing great art and a great relationship. You're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We've been joined this afternoon by Pierre Bennu and Jamyla Bennu. Thank you, Pierre and Jamyla. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
I've been honored, bro. Thank you so much. So much.
Thank you. Y'all take care.
All right, now. Take care.
Peace.
Well, I think that shows that collective bargaining is a necessary tool in order for people to have equity in a system that is sometimes corrupt. Unions have not always, but are certainly a part of America's fabric, democratic fabric, and it shows that until we get out and actually show people what we need, we can be run over. So North Carolina's a right to work state, but I'm really proud of our brothers and sisters that are in Wisconsin that are fighting for collective bargaining in the state too, for equity.
I think that what the governments in Wisconsin and Ohio are trying to do is just terrible, that it's another way to hold the working man accountable for the big economic crisis that the government's made.
I feel very strongly about collective bargaining. I feel very strongly about the rights of workers. I am a union person, that is, I believe in unions. In fact, the first year that I graduated from Central, I was teaching in New York City, and there was a big strike going on, and I was glad to join the picket line. So yes, I believe very strongly in unions, and I am with the people in Wisconsin.
You're back on Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and we are joined by writer extraordinaire, thinker extraordinaire, Rebecca Walker, who is coming to us from her house in Hawaii. How are you doing this afternoon, or this morning for you? How are you doing, Rebecca?
I'm really well. I'm happy to be here talking to you on this lovely, it's not quite sunny here, but it's definitely warm and warming up. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right into it. We're watching everything that's happening in Northern Africa and the Middle East, whether it's Libya or Tunisia or Egypt. At the same time here in the States, we're looking at attacks on Planned Parenthood. We're looking at huge billboards, basically accusing black women of genocide, over the last 20 years. We have these protests, public workers in Wisconsin, right? The rebirth of a labor movement here in the United States, that's spreading to Indiana and New Jersey and all these other places. I don't think any of us expected that this is what the first 2 months of 2011 would look like. But how are you processing all this stuff that's occurring? It's like, Larry Neal has this great piece about Malcolm X, where he talks about Malcolm X being at the center of a swirl of events. And it seems as though we're all at the center of this swirl of events that's taking place, globally here in 2011.
Yes. I think the Mayans may have had an inkling that this is all going to happen. So how am I doing in the swirl of events? I was thinking about that before the interview and before coming on to talk to you, because really things are falling apart, aren't they? And the only way to apprehend things falling apart and maintain one's sanity is to think about how the natural evolution of things falling apart is for them to remake themselves, hopefully in a way that's better for more people. Right. So things need to fall apart on a certain level. I'm very encouraged by this burgeoning labor movement that we're seeing in Wisconsin. I hope that it spreads. I think the reaction, especially to the billboard in New York portraying black women's wombs as the most dangerous place for black children, the fact that it was brought down or is in the process of being brought down because of the response of men and women to the absolute absurdity and insulting nature of the billboard is very good news. I think people are finding their voice. I think America, in fact, is being encouraged by what's happening in the Middle East, which is an interesting reversal. I was talking to where is Fatima from? I think she's Iranian. I was talking to an Iranian feminist yesterday who lives in Sweden, and she was saying that for the first time she feels that the Middle East has an opportunity to not necessarily glean their ideas about democracy from the West, but in fact to come up with an organic expression of what they deeply believe and have at the heart of their culture and have had for thousands of years. Of course, she was concerned about the role of women in this evolving new vision, but she had great faith that the cultivation of young women's leadership, especially over the last 30 years, was going to pay off in this new era in the Middle East. So we have to, stay cool and carry on, I think. And that's what I'm doing here in Maui. you know, in addition to having a serious spiritual practice, which is very, very important, I think, at this time, to not be so focused on what's happening intellectually and politically and engaging only with our minds, but also trying to step back, take a breath, see the bigger picture, have some level of equanimity in the midst of the change, and pray from whatever faith we find ourselves for a peaceful outcome, you know.
I keep wondering, though, that if all this activity was occurring, say, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, would we have even been aware of it? You know, there are ways in which mainstream media is not inclined to cover labor protest in Madison, Wisconsin. You know, there are ways that mainstream corporate media is not inclined, you know, to cover the Middle East in certain kinds of ways. We've all really experienced this moment because of social media, right? It's so much more immediate to us in ways that, and the fact that, you know, you can clearly see that the protesters in Wisconsin are taking a great deal of energy from what they've seen on TV and been exposed to on Twitter and Facebook from Egypt. You know, folks kept wondering, you know, when is what's happening over there? When are we going to see that kind of energy, you know, in the United States? And just literally, boom, right? It occurs in the last place we might have expected. You know, how are we processing this world so much differently because of the social media piece?
Well, everything that you just said, obviously, I think, and we talked about this a little bit before, that the neutralization, if you will, of the gatekeepers has been a major development, and it will continue to be, I think, because we no longer have to filter our message through people who have the power to either silence our message or reshape it in a way that's palatable to the ruling class elite, the oligarchs, if we just want to put it plainly. So yes, the social media aspect has a lot to do with giving us free, unfettered access to one another, and to what I see very much, and I'm encouraged by, is the brilliance that comes out of this freedom, that people are expressing themselves in ways that are much more nuanced and complex than they would be if they had to filter their message through mainstream media. I mean, for instance, even in our discussion, it would be very difficult for me to even integrate a discussion of spirituality, or heaven forbid, Buddhism, in a specific way, say if I were doing this interview on CNN.
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
So we now have these spaces that we're creating for more complex dialogue, and I think that's a result of social media. Clay Shirky and Malcolm Gladwell have been having this exchange around whether or not social media is actually beneficial for social change.
Right.
You know, that's been a very interesting discussion. Malcolm Gladwell obviously was saying that he doesn't agree, and then Clay Shirky responded, of course, and my response to both of them is what happens when our social media outlets are shut down, as is what happened in Egypt for that time, when governments or people in power have the ability to take away this great democratizing tool. And so, again, people like Douglas Rushkoff, people are starting to talk more about that, about how we can. It's almost like going off the grid. You know, here in Hawaii, many people are not hooked up to the grid in any way. I mean, we've got a water catchment system, you know, so with filtration and solar panels, and, you know, we're not on the electric grid. So how can we get our social media off of the grid in such a way that we cannot be silenced, even if someone wants to switch? So I think that's really the new frontier and what we should be talking about. Yes, it's wonderful, and then how can we further democratize it and have our own ownership of it so that it cannot be stopped?
Well, let me ask you this question, and you're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with Rebecca Walker, who's coming to us from Maui, her home in Hawaii. Let me ask you this question. I mean, you're the product of a major literary figure. You, of course, are your own major literary figure. And what we're watching now is that this notion of book culture, as we've known it for so many years, is slipping away. And the folks who have ideas that seem to matter the most these days are folks who are blogging, folks who are using social media. I mean, there's literary genius that we see all the time in 140 characters, on Twitter. How are you making this transition from what I'll say the comfort of book culture to this other arena, which is daunting, I think, for many of us, who have come to recognize and value really the power of the published book?
Oh, very, very difficult transition, I think, for many of us who have grown up in such a literary environment where most of our ideas that have cultivated our minds and our growth have come from the book.
Yeah.
So, I'm right there with you. I think I'm dealing with it by writing a lot for online outlets. I write a lot for The Root. I do some stuff for Newsweek or CNN.com, and the Wall Street Journal just asked me to do a piece on the breast pump controversy. So I try to, I've tried and I've succeeded for the most part over the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years to cultivate a voice that works in that medium, in the digital medium.
Right.
And at the same time, I'm still working on my literary work. So I'm in the middle of writing a book. I haven't given up on the book.
Yeah.
I think that space of deep reflection, of journeying to another place, whether it's another land or another intellectual space or a psycho-spiritual space, is an experience that is deeply endemic to reading a book. And so I'm not letting go of that. But I think we are, all of us, having to develop these different modalities of communicating. We can't just be reliant upon the book and taking it for granted, as it were. Joel Dreyfus and I, actually, the editor of The Root, who's amazing, we're just talking about doing a book column. So I've been thinking for the last couple of days about a good title for a column for The Root on books.
What are you reading these days?
What am I reading?
What are you reading? Yes.
I'm reading, what am I reading right now? I'm reading several books. I'm reading How the West Was Lost by Dambisa Moyo, the book about the rise of China and developing, what we used to call developing nations,
right.
And how their economies are affecting our economy, and how some of the decisions that we've made in the last 50 years are affecting our economy. What else am I reading? I'm reading, it's always funny when people ask. I'm reading a great book of poetry by a Russian poet named Vera Pavlova called If There Is Something to Desire, There Is Nothing to Regret. I hope I'm getting that right. It's wonderful. She's a wonderful poet. I'm reading, I'm a memoirist, so I find myself reading lots of memoirs, though now I can't remember any of them. I'm going to be reading Harlem is Nowhere, the new memoir by Sharifa Pitts, I think it's her last name. What else? Books come to me every day in the mail. I have Walter Mosley's book about Ptolemy Gray on my stack.
Okay.
What are you reading?
What am I reading? I'm reading a great new book about the Black Stone Rangers by Natalie Moore, about their rise and fall in Chicago. I'm reading a great book by Natalie Fleetwood, who teaches at Rutgers, and she just wrote a book about the Black image for University of Chicago Press. And I'm specifically reading today Grant Fard's book, What's My Name? Preparing for class tonight. It's a book about the relationship between athleticism and Black intellectual thoughts. So there's a chapter on T.L.L. James, one on Ali, one on Bob Marley. Really fascinating book. But you're also working on a book now on Black Cool.
I'm so interested in all those books. Just write those down. You're smarter than mine. Or more, I should say more academic. I need to read more academic. I'm doing this, I'm teaching in Sweden in a couple months.
Okay.
And I've taught there. I taught there last year. And I teach the PhD postdocs about how to integrate creativity into their academic writing.
Yeah.
And when I teach in Europe, I am so shocked by how much better prepared they are on so many levels. I mean, their rigor is shocking to me. You know, in one conversation, their references span the globe. They have sort of metabolized so many different perspectives. And so every time I'm about to go, I feel like I really need to bone up on my so you're helping me with your list. So yeah, I'm working on a collection about Black cool. Right now it's called 1,000 Streams of Blackness. And it's a look at different elements of Black cool, trying to kind of create a glossary of elements that I think epitomize what we consider Black cool. And part of why I want to do it is because I feel that all of those elements are being appropriated and they're not being necessarily linked back to Blackness.
Right. There's no citation, you know, for where the references are coming from. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, and we know that. That's an old, you know. But I want to claim some territory before it's too late, you know. So I'm looking at these different elements. I studied with Robert Farris Thompson when I was at Yale, and Sylvia Boone.
Legendary figure, Robert Farris Thompson. You know, not enough folks, you know Flash of the Spirit. I mean, it's, yeah. foundational work in the field, no question.
Yes, yes. And so, and Sylvia Boone, too, who was, you know, a great mentor to me, who studied under him, was the first Black woman to get tenure at Yale. Also, unfortunately, the first Black woman to be buried in the Yale Cemetery. A beautiful soul who wrote an incredible book called Radiance from the Waters about her study of Mende culture in Sierra Leone. Very influential in my thinking. But all of those people, Bell and Sylvia and Thompson, encouraged me to look at the way in which Black culture is encoded in the built environment. And so I did my thesis at Yale on shacks in the South and the ways in which African culturalisms were even still in this very impoverished or impossibly stressed environment still there. So the porch, the chair on the porch, the iron, you know, even though it was junk cars in the front lawn, you know, iron is so important in West African culture. The photographs on the walls, you know, when you go to shacks in the South or homes in the South, Black homes, you often see this incredible collage of the whole family tree, you know, in these little snapshots, Kodak, Polaroid, and seeing that as a kind of altar to the ancestors, you know. So reading the built environment in a way that connects us over time and place. So Black cool is kind of an offshoot of that. I'm looking at different elements, including swagger, audacity, evolution, you know, looking at a piece about Miles Davis and how he was never satisfied with the status quo, and he always pushed himself to the next level, irrespective of what is commercially viable. To me, that's an element of cool. So lots of different writers writing about these different elements.
What about a term like restraint? You know, I've been fascinating. iTunes just released, you know, 4 episodes from the Nat King Cole show in the 1950s. And, you know, the thing that struck me as I'm watching these episodes is that there's a way in which Nat King Cole's kind of been written out of history. But, you know, when you see his walk and his talk and how stylish he was, and this really kind of cutting edge crossover figure in the 1950s, you know, immediately the first person I thought of was Obama, and how, you know, Nat King Cole has to be part of Barack Obama's stylistic DNA. You know, the folks that he looked at to find models for how he could exist in the world. Absolutely, and one of the elements I'm looking at is reserve. Yeah, and I think that's the restraint, reserve. Yeah, absolutely. This idea of holding ourselves in such a way that there's mystery, there's elegance, there's all of those positive aspects that make us cool. There's a kind of inaccessibility
a space created. You must apprehend me if I am reserved. Right. I'm not going to give you myself. I'm going to allow you. I'm going to make you come to me. Yeah. And then, but also the flip side of that, which is the way in which we have had to be contained in order to survive. Because if we step too far out, there's this sense that we can be, you know, from lynched to silenced to
there's danger.
It's dangerous, right? So this survival aspect of cool is something that I'm really interested in. You know, cool as an aesthetic choice, but cool also for Black people as
survival mechanism. Yeah.
Totally. So it's really exciting, and I want you to write a piece for me.
Well, I'd love to do a piece on Nat King Cole. It's you know, as sure as we're speaking right now.
Yeah. Well, let's get to it. We'll make it happen. That sounds good. Yeah.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with the writer and activist and brilliant thinker all the way around, Rebecca Walker, who's coming to us from her home in Hawaii. You know, let me ask you this last question, you know, before, you know, we call it a day, because we're definitely going to want to have you on again. You've written about, you know, parenting and mothering. How has that changed your process, you know, as the writer? As the thinker, you know, as all this swirl of events are occurring, you know, how are you processing that, not so much as Rebecca Walker, the thinker, but as Rebecca Walker, the mom?
It's very difficult. I have my son sitting very close to me, and he's been given the extra treat of being able to be on the iPad so that I can make sure that he's not coming over. I mean, I think that when you become a mother, you have to obviously juggle so much more. But I'm also much more conscious of things that were not previously front and center on my agenda. Education, for instance. I had a very good education. You know, I mean, I went to public school for the first, you know, through elementary school and junior high, and then I was able to go to a private school that was excellent, and then on to Yale, and then on to graduate school. But what I notice here in Hawaii especially is how terrible the public schools are, and how the history of colonialism here in Hawaii has created a public school system that is very much designed to create an entire population that works in the tourism industry. So it's very much about serving others. And so they don't, in the public school system, encourage creativity, independent thought, dynamic leadership. It's all about rote learning. It's all about
following directions.
Exactly. And I think that's something that is, you know, part of the school system nationwide.
Right, we've seen that across the board, yeah.
I mean, and so I'm much more concerned about things like that, and I think about stats like, you know, the gifted population in China, for instance, is 300 million out of their billion, however many people that I think it's billions. They have 300 million that's considered gifted if you test it, and we have 300 million people in our country. You know, so I think a lot about about how we can, as a mom, I think about my son and how to prepare him for a future that I cannot see, that I cannot know.
Right.
And so I'm very focused on education, but at the same time, I have to weigh what education really is going to be beneficial. So here, for instance, I've been looking at schools, one based on a very traditional liberal arts model, one based on a very scientific, technological model, which we in our generation, I think, would think of as vocational and not necessarily going to prepare us for the future.
For a digital world, yeah.
You know, what is best? I'm not so sure that the liberal arts version is ultimately best. I mean, these are the kinds of things that being a mom makes me think about, in addition to everything else. You know, having an African-American son, you think about police brutality much more. I think about the, you know, prison system much more. You know, I mean, I think about health, I'm right there with Michelle Obama and so many activists around issues of obesity, school lunches, the corn syrup lobbies, the soy lobbies that we've got in our foods. We have food products rather than real food. I mean, when you're giving a young person, you have to feed them every day, and watch how it affects their bodies and the way in which their bones are forming and their skin and their minds. I mean, it's very direct in a way that it wasn't for me before.
Absolutely.
So I could go on and on about that.
You've been watching Left of Black, and I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and we've been joined this afternoon here in Durham and this morning in Hawaii by Rebecca Walker. Rebecca, thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. I'm so glad we had an opportunity to talk.
Yes, I am also. We'll have a chance to talk again.
Good. I hope so.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.